You think you know why people treat you the way they do. You probably don't. You think it's about who you are. Most of the time, it's about what they believe you can give them, what they believe you'll tolerate, and what they believe they stand to lose if they treat you differently. That's the part nobody explains to you growing up. Nobody sits you down and says, attention is currency, availability has a price, and the way people behave toward you is rarely a fixed reflection of your worth. It's a moving calculation of your value to them, made and remade every single day, mostly without their own awareness. Here's where it starts to feel personal. You were always available for someone. You answered every call. You showed up every time. And somewhere in that consistency, something quietly broke. Not because they stopped caring necessarily, but because certainty kills appreciation. The moment your presence became guaranteed, it stopped being valuable. You didn't become less important. You became predictable. And human beings, for all their talk of loving stability, are wired to chase what feels uncertain and take for granted what feels owned. Have you ever noticed that? You help someone once and you're generous. You help them 5 times and it's kindness. You help them 50 times and somewhere along the way, without either of you agreeing to it, it stopped being a favor and became an obligation. Then the day you can't help, the one day you're tired, or broke, or simply say no, you're suddenly the villain of a story you didn't know you were writing. That's not betrayal in the dramatic sense. That's just how expectation quietly replaces gratitude when nobody's paying attention. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. You finally set a boundary, just one. You say no to something you would have said yes to a year ago, and almost immediately someone tells you that you've changed, not that you've grown, not that you've healed. Changed like it's an accusation. Think about what that reaction actually reveals. It's rarely about you becoming a worse person. It's about you becoming a less controllable one. The version of you that existed before the boundary was easier to predict, easier to lean on, easier to quietly benefit from. The boundary didn't create a new you. It just made the old dynamic visible. Now think about your own life for a moment. Think about someone who ignored you completely when you had nothing they wanted, no status, no money, no connections, no particular shine. And think about how quickly that changed the moment you gained something they noticed. That's not a coincidence, and it's not always conscious cruelty on their part. Most people don't wake up and decide to be users. They simply respond to perceived value, the same way water finds the lowest point in a room. You didn't become more lovable. You became more useful. And most people have never learned to tell the difference between the two in themselves or in anyone else. This is the part people rarely admit. Some of the people who supported you hardest during your struggles get strangely quiet during your success. Not all of them, but some. And it isn't always jealousy in the ugly, cartoonish sense. Sometimes it's something quieter and sadder. Your growth reorganizes a relationship that depended on you needing them. If someone's sense of importance was built on being the one who helps you, your independence doesn't just change your life. It removes their role in it. Some people can adapt to that, others can't. And the ones who can't will rarely tell you the truth about why they're pulling away. They'll just drift, get busy, get distant, find small things to criticize, watch for it, not with suspicion, with clarity. Because here's the distinction that matters more than almost anything else in this video. The mature person does not become paranoid. The mature person becomes observant. Paranoia assumes the worst about everyone. Observation simply pays attention to what's actually happening and lets the evidence speak before the emotion does. That difference will save you more heartbreak than any amount of self-protection ever could. So let's go deeper into what perception actually does to behavior. A confident person and an insecure person can do the exact same thing, say the same sentence, walk away from the same argument, set the exact same boundary, and receive completely different reactions. Confidence gets read as strength. Insecurity performing the identical action gets read as weakness or spite. Why? Because people aren't only responding to your actions. They're responding to what they believe your actions mean about your position. And your position, in most social dynamics, is built far more on perceived certainty than on objective fact. This isn't a call to fake confidence you don't feel. It's an invitation to notice how much of your treatment in this world is shaped by belief rather than reality, theirs about you, and honestly, yours about them. Because people will tolerate things from someone they fear, losing that they would never tolerate from someone they feel they could easily replace. Sit with that for a second. It explains almost every unbalanced relationship you've ever watched from the outside and thought, why does she put up with that? Why does he keep forgiving that? It's rarely blindness. It's usually this, somewhere inside them. A quiet calculation has been made that losing the person is a worse outcome than tolerating the treatment. Whether that calculation is accurate is an entirely different question. But it's the calculation running the relationship, not love in its purest form, and definitely not logic. Now here's a darker layer. Some people don't miss you. They miss the access they had to you. Your time, your attention, your resources, your emotional labor, your willingness to listen at 1 a.m. when that access disappears. They experience something that feels like grief, and they call it missing you, but if you watch closely, what they're actually mourning is the convenience of your presence, not the specific irreplaceable person you are. This is a hard thing to accept about people you've loved. It's an even harder thing to accept about yourself, because you've done this too. Everyone has grieved access and called it love at least once. And some people don't want you to fail. That's important to say clearly, because this isn't a video about assuming everyone around you is secretly hoping you fall apart. Most people don't want that. But some people, quietly, don't want you to surpass them either. There's a specific kind of discomfort that shows up not when you're struggling, and not when you're thriving in a lane that doesn't threaten theirs, but the exact moment you outgrow the frame they built you inside of. Watch what happens the moment you stop needing someone's approval. Some people will celebrate it, and some people will suddenly find you arrogant, when what actually happened is you simply stopped asking permission to be yourself. But here's where it gets uncomfortable in a different direction. Because it would be easy to make this video and let you walk away thinking everyone around you is secretly strategic and self-interested. That's not true, and it's not the point. Not every person who pulls away is plotting against you. Not every disagreement is betrayal. Not every silence is a hidden agenda. Most people are simply reacting to fear, to insecurity, to their own unresolved history, not executing some cold, calculated plan. The goal here was never to make you distrust everyone. The goal is to stop you from being blindly trusting. Those are two very different outcomes, and confusing them will either turn you cynical or keep you naive. Neither one protects you. So where's the line? Between kindness and being exploited, between forgiveness and having no boundaries, between loyalty and simply tolerating disrespect because leaving feels scarier than staying. Between humility and quietly shrinking yourself so the people around you feel more comfortable. These distinctions are not obvious, and most people never sit down and actually think through where their own line is, which is exactly why it keeps getting crossed. You cannot defend a boundary you've never defined, even to yourself. Because here's a truth that will sting a little. Some people don't test your boundaries out of malice. They test them the way water tests a dam, slowly, incrementally, almost without intention, just to see what holds. Even when it isn't conscious. Confrontation over something small feels petty, so you let it go. And letting it go teaches them, without either of you saying a word, exactly how much further they can push next time. Think about the workplace for a moment, because this pattern doesn't only live in romance and friendship. The colleague who stays late every time, covers every shift, never complains, That person often gets remembered last when promotions are handed out, not because their work was weaker, but because reliability over time stops registering as a strength and starts registering as a fixed feature of the furniture. Meanwhile, the person who occasionally says no, who protects their time, who makes their limits visible, is somehow read as more valuable, more senior, more worth negotiating with. It isn't fair. It also isn't rare. Scarcity shapes perceived worth in a boardroom exactly the way it shapes it in a relationship. And favoritism works on the same hidden current. Watch closely, and you'll notice that favoritism is rarely about who works hardest. It's about who makes the person in power feel the most secure, the most admired, the least challenged. That's an uncomfortable thing to realize about a boss you respected, or a parent who always seemed to prefer someone else. It usually wasn't about merit at all. It was about which child, which employee, which friend required the least emotional cost to keep close. Now turn the lens on yourself, because this is the part that separates a video that makes you feel smart from one that actually makes you wiser. You are not immune to any of this. You've been irrational when you were afraid. You've been selfish when you felt threatened. You've been jealous when you felt insecure, and if you're honest, you've bent the truth or delayed an uncomfortable conversation when the honest version of it would have cost you something you weren't ready to lose. This isn't an accusation. It's a mirror. Understanding human nature was never just about reading other people correctly. It was always, underneath everything, about understanding your own nature first, because you cannot see people clearly through a lens fogged by your own fear, desire, and self-interest. Here's the part people almost never admit to themselves. Sometimes you don't see the person standing in front of you. You see the person you desperately need them to be. You've done this in relationships. You've done this with friends who kept disappointing you. You've done this with family members you kept excusing. And here's the harder truth underneath that one. Sometimes you don't miss the red flags because they were hidden. You miss them because acknowledging them would have forced you into a decision you weren't emotionally ready to make. Denial isn't stupidity. Denial is often just delayed grief, wearing the costume of optimism. There's another layer to this that rarely gets said out loud. Attention itself can manufacture value where none objectively exists. Chase someone hard enough, and they start to believe they must be worth chasing. Withdraw your attention, and suddenly the same person who ignored you starts wondering what changed. This isn't about playing games. It's about recognizing that human beings are terrible judges of worth in isolation. They measure it relative to demand, relative to scarcity, relative to what other people seem to want. That's why the person who chased you the least sometimes ends up respected the most, and the person who gave everything, instantly, without restraint, sometimes ends up taken for granted. It has nothing to do with how deserving either of them actually was. Why did that person suddenly change toward you? Why did they respect you only after you stopped chasing them? Why did their entire tone shift the moment you became less available, less desperate, less eager to prove yourself worthy of their time? Ask yourself those questions honestly, about a real person from your own life, and you'll likely find the same pattern hiding underneath a dozen different situations you once explained away as coincidence. This is where it gets strategic, not cynical. Perception drives social power. People respond to what they believe you're capable of, what they believe you'll accept, and what they believe you have to lose. That's simply how influence moves through every relationship, every workplace, every family system you've ever been part of. But understanding that mechanism is not permission to manipulate it cruelly. It's permission to stop being unconsciously manipulated by it. There's a version of power that's loud, the kind that needs an audience, needs to dominate a room, needs everyone watching to confirm it's real. And there's a version that's quiet. Quiet power looks like walking away without begging for an explanation. It looks like being comfortable being misunderstood by people who were never going to understand you anyway. It looks like not revealing every insecurity to someone who hasn't earned that access. It looks like not letting anger write your next sentence. It looks like knowing exactly when silence says more than any argument could. And quiet power knows something else. It knows the difference between someone who deserves a second chance and someone who is simply being given another opportunity to repeat the exact same behavior with better manners. Those two situations look identical in the moment. Only time tells you which one you're actually in. So what do you do with all of this? You don't become suspicious of everyone who's ever been kind to you. You don't audit every relationship for hidden motives until warmth feels impossible. That's not wisdom, that's a different kind of prison. What you do is simpler and far more sustainable. You watch. You watch how people treat you when you have nothing left to offer them. You watch how they react the moment they realize they can no longer predict you, no longer control you, no longer assume you'll always be available. That single moment, the moment you stop being convenient, tells you more about a person's true regard for you than 100 compliments ever could. You cannot control human nature, not theirs and honestly not fully your own. You cannot guarantee loyalty from anyone, no matter how much you've given them. You cannot prevent betrayal simply by being a good person, because betrayal was never really about your goodness in the first place. You cannot force anyone to respect you who has already decided, somewhere quiet and unspoken, that you're someone they can take from. But you can stop being surprised. Once you understand how people move when their fear, their insecurity, their self-interest, and their desire for control are all quietly running underneath their behavior, you stop mistaking it for something personal every single time. You become harder to deceive, harder to manipulate, far more careful about who earns access to your time, your trust, and your energy. Not because you've stopped believing in people. Because you've finally stopped being blind to what they actually are, contradictory, self-interested, capable of real love and quiet betrayal in the very same breath. Exactly like you. And the moment you truly accept that, you stop asking why people do what they do. You already know.